well remember the league in Hastings in the mid-50s. That was near the end of the league. And then, you know, I guess as midget, juvenile, that sort of thing, we went out and kind of skated with them. We weren't good enough to play for them, but we certainly skated with them. Guys like Jimmy Morrow and Mo Fife from Hastings, I knew him well. I worked on his farm as a kid. Anyway, so we had just felt. Oh, okay. So my partner, my writing partner, myself, my writing partner wrote the book on the Dick Clapper history of Hastings too recently, and some of you, I think, have maybe seen that book or read it. And I did the family history genealogy aspect of that book. That's really our interest, is local area family histories here.
Can you turn the volume up?
So throughout the writing of that, people kept reminding us, boy, we got to document this history. And a Lakefield player, Don Red Wasson, was one of the driving forces. I used to have coffee with him, and I guess to shut Don up, we said, okay, we'll do it. So that's kind of where we come from here. But so I think with that, we'll just jump into it. Don has asked me to concentrate on the Lakefield component of the league, which I'm doing, but the first 10 minutes or so are going to be general history. I couldn't see how I could discuss the Lakefield contribution to the league without having a background on the league. So that's where we're going. So we're going to spend about 10, 15 minutes on the history of the league, and then proceed into some of the Lakefield aspect of it, or contribution. So the Trent Valley Hockey League, most of you are probably aware of this, that the OHA was formed in 1897. And the problem with that, I'm not going to stand here and read the slides, but the problem with that was the OHA addressed intermediate, first of all intermediate, and then or senior and then intermediate level hockey into the larger communities such as Belleville, Oshawa, Peterborough, Kingston, that sort of thing. The small communities right here, their restrictions were so stringent that there's no way they could compete. They had requirements on arena size, and as I get into it, you're going to understand this a little better. So these people were left, as we say, swinging in the wind. Okay, Mike. So this is just a little article taken from the Hastings Star, but I think this generally describes the situation in the area of the Trent Valley at the time. So they lamented that winter's coming on, they don't have any hockey. They don't have an arena, they don't have any hockey. What are they going to do for the winter? They have lots of summer activity, boating, canoeing, that sort of thing, but no winter activity. Okay, sir, Mike. So here are the founding fathers. So the league was put together in the fall of 1899. In the first game, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So here are some of the league, the founding fathers. So you can see this Mr. Wallace from Keene, and I've tried to look him up on who he was. I can't even find him on a census for that era, so if anyone knows who he is, I'd appreciate. But, you know, McCarthy, we know that name in Keene. And then in Lakefield, of course, it was the Strickland family and Redpath from the paper. And some of these guys were players, too. I think James was one of the early players. And from Camelford came the name Stockdale. That was even that is a dubious name. I shouldn't say dubious, but I haven't been able to find it in the census. I think it was somebody that was there, transit for 2 or 3 years, and then gone again. From Millbrook was Clary. That's a local, an old name there. And from Peterborough Lakeview came Meagher and Gearin. But I just want to stop there for a minute. So people say, well, who is Lakeview? This is an interesting history. Lakeview were the South End boys, a bunch of Irishmen, most of them, that lived around Little Lake. Of course, that was South End Peterborough in those days. So some names in the Hockey Hall of Fame that you recognize other than Guerin and Meagher were Kelly, Crowley, the original Bill Crowley in the Hockey Hall of Fame, those people. And they had learned their skills playing shinny on Little Lake until 1897. And even after that, some of them preferred for recreation to stick to shinny as opposed to organized hockey. However, when the league came along, they said, we're putting a team in. So most of those players, and their names are coming out in the book, a number of them are in the Hockey Hall of Fame. However, one name I want to bring out is a name by the name of James Patrick Joseph Kelly that played with these guys. And it appears he played in the first game or so. However, he and his friend, by the name of Walter Phelan, and some of you recognize that name. He's in the Sports Hall of Fame here, one of the early hockey players. He went to the Western Pennsylvania Hockey League, as did Kelly. And Phelan is in the Sports Hall of Fame in Pittsburgh. He was one of the all-star players. His friend Kelly didn't do so well. He was a backup goalie, played a few games. However, his fame or legacy comes from another source. His son was the Hollywood-renowned Gene Kelly. So from Norwood came Lou McGregor, and that's an old name in Coburg. I think still, or in Norwood, I should say, so that's still around today. Okay, Mike. Oh, yep, went the wrong way, I think. So, first TVL game, Friday, January 12th, 1900. Keene and Peterborough fans arrived special train. This was held at the Lakefield curling rink. Now the curling rink was up on Strickland and Queen Street. It was almost like a teepee type or like a circus tent construction. It was wood, but it was sort of octagonal. And this was typical of the communities in those days. Camelford was the same. Their curling rinks got converted into at least double duty, curling and hockey. They were pretty crude. There was games protested because there wasn't enough light in them. So Keene defeated Lakefield that night 8-5. However, the gracious Lakefield team treated the Keene boys to a late night banquet. Minus 12 or maybe minus 20 by then outside. Okay. So this is a list going from 1900 right clean through the league. So you can see that the big players were Camelford, Marmora, Sterling. However, look at this. They never won it. Never once won it. They were runners-up, I think 14 times or 13 times, something like that, and never got over the hump. So a couple of things I'm going to talk about tonight is the 1912 Marmora team, or Lakefield team, I should say. Marmora beat them, but that's an interesting history. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the 1948 Lakefield team in here too. There was an incident there, and that's what we're writing the stories. We're not writing that Havelock beat Hastings 5-2. It's the stories we're writing each year. Okay then. So I want to now take a minute to talk about TVL NHL alumni. Most people are surprised to see this, but you can see we got six people went on to the NHL there, 6 players. So it started with Fred Doherty, 1918. He was Asphodel Hastings. He played for Montreal Canadiens. When I say he played for Montreal Canadiens, he was called up for playoffs. He was basically senior OHA hockey and semi-pro, and he got called up for a playoff. When I say Asphodel Hastings, he was actually born in Westwood. His father ran a hotel in Westwood. Everybody knows where Westwood is, I'm sure. you know, their social connections were Hastings, their church connections, his marriage records, burial, that sort of thing was in Hastings. So that's why I kind of slipped Hastings in there. Just happens that I'm from Hastings too, though. So. And then 1917-21 was Jack Coughlin from Durrell, Lakefield, Montreal Canadiens. He played 3 seasons in the NHL, 4 different teams. But by 4 different teams, what was the Quebec team? I think I hit it later. They folded into the Hamilton Tigers or something like that. This is early, the first years of the NHL. And when I say he played 4 seasons, it doesn't mean he played, you know, don't forget a season was only a couple months. I think in total he only played maybe 18 NHL games over the 3 seasons, but he's an NHLer. Next but not least, for sure, 27-47 was Dick Clapper from Hastings. Played for Boston Bruins, and we don't have to talk about him. I mean, he was one of the all-time greats, still holds many of the records today, including he was the first active player to be inducted in the Sports Hall of Fame. Hastings Pride and Joy, and I knew him very well. My family was, on both my maternal and paternal side, were very close to his family. I remember drinking tea out of that silver set that he was donated the night he retired often over in East City. His wife always pulled it out. Here's another one that not many people know about, 31-33, Doug Brennan from Havelock. Doug Brennan was from East City. Raised in East City till the age of 15, 16 here in Peterborough. His family moved to Havelock. His dad bought the Havelock Hotel and operated it when he was about 16, 17. And so naturally he just flowed right into the TBL in about 1923 or 4. And he went up against Clapper, and the book is bringing this out. We're calling it the showdown that wasn't. Clapper and his brother, so there was the 2 Brennan brothers and the 2 Clapper brothers. And everyone was anticipating this showdown. However, at that season, they had entered in an agreement with the OHA that the winner would go on and represent the region in OHA playoffs. And so they had this schedule all ironed out, and as they got to the playoffs, the OHA said, if you're going to have a team in this is your timing. And so there was really no playoff. It was a 1-game playoff. And Tweed had I got to think about this for a minute. Tweed had defeated Havelock in at least one, if not both, their games. They were all typically 2 games, home and home games. However, Hastings had beat Tweed in both their games. The reason Hastings hadn't beat Havelock in either of their games, Dick Clapper's father was the coach of the Hastings team. He was Mr. Hastings, and that's one thing this book is going to do, is give him his rightful place in history, because Hastings has never granted it to him. He was a sly old guy, and so he pulled his son out. His son was playing junior that year too, and of course, junior, he's with all his buddies, all his school buddies, so that's where he preferred to be. And that was fine with that, keep him rested up for this big showdown with Havelock. It was going to be a 1-game showdown. It never happened, because the playoff was against Tweed, because simply of the record, Havelock had defeated Hastings with Clapper out of the lineup, so it never happened. And 3 months later, Dick was off playing junior hockey in Toronto, and 2 years after that, he was skating with the Boston Bruins. Wayne Wiener Brown from Marma, some of you know him. He played in the league at least 3-4 years. He played with Gus Leonard, and many of you know Gus Leonard from Marma. He lived here in Peterborough, just passed away 6 months ago or something like that, maybe a year ago. Gus was a great guy. So Brown went on to play with the Boston Bruins. One playoff, he broke his leg and never went back to NHL, but then he went, I guess it'd be OHA senior with Balbo McFarland's, and he won a gold medal. And then he came back to the league again. And then, of course, most famous is 56 to 79 was Bobby, so Bobby Hull played in the league in 1953 with his dad. And so Bobby we're in touch with him. We had some discussion with him, phone discussions. He's in Chicago for the winter. He's going to do the forward for us. And by the way, the cover of the book is an action shot. It's taken from the Examiner, a game in Havelock in 1954. And the feature on it is Moon Wooten. And many of you remember Moon Wooten from lacrosse. He's considered probably the top goaltender OLA lacrosse ever. And so we want to do that. But also Moon's daughter and her husband are friends of my writing partner. They're in Vancouver. And her husband happens to be Jim Hewson, who is the play-by-play commentator with the Vancouver Canucks. So he's probably going to do something for us too. Okay, that took a long time, but I think it was worth it. So here's here they are. Here's the 6 that went on to the NHL. So it's just, you could read it. I don't have to read it over to you there. So, it started with Jack Coughlin, Fred Doherty from Westwood, Wiener Brown, Marma, Clapper from Hastings, of course, Doug Brennan, Havelock. We're having a hard time coming up with a good picture of Havelock, and we're very disappointed too that Havelock has nothing, absolutely nothing. They won it 4 years in a row, and there's not a thing in their history on it. We're a little shocked by that, but and I think they're going to be a little embarrassed when we do the book. And there's not a picture from Havelock, but and of course everybody knows who that is. Okay. So just the particulars about Jack or Coughlin, John Joseph Jack Coughlin. He was sometimes known as Jerry, and we've even seen Gerald in his name, but I haven't found that in any census. The family census. He was always John Joseph. So he was known as Jack or Jerry. So he was born 1892, Concession 7, Lot 15, Durrell Township, south of Lakefield. Died 1959. That's actually wrong. That's 69 in Peterborough. The reason I bring this out, and I don't want to take from the pride of Durrell, but really he lived a few hundred yards from here. I'm sure he played all his hockey with Lakefield boys. I drove by this, lot, Concession 7, Lot 15. If you're driving down the River Road south going towards Peterborough, just before you hit Lot 24, if you look up on the hill, there's an old barn there, clearly turn-of-the-century barn, and I think that was their farm lot. The 1861 agricultural census shows them with 107 acres. That's consistent with 100 acres plus a broken front along the water line. And I expect he learned his hockey right there, in the frozen rivers of the Otonabee River, as Clapper learned his on the frozen rivers, or the frozen shores of the Trent River, just a little bit downstream. So I think I've covered all that. Here's his NHL career, 1917 to 21, Toronto Rangers, Quebec Bulldogs, Hamilton Tigers. And as I say, the Quebec Bulldogs folded into the Hamilton Tigers, and then, of course, the Montreal Canadiens for a season. Okay. Besides hockey players, we had a number of famous referees that refereed in the league. Early 1900 was Roy Shuley from Welland, Ontario. He went to the Western Pennsylvania Hockey League along with Kelly that I spoke of, and Walter Phelan. Early 1900s, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Chancellor Elliott from Kingston was an NHL referee, and he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Early 1900s, Charles Albert Waghorn, Toronto, coached it. The TVL typically brought top-name referees in for their playoff games. A lot of the refereeing was contentious season, but for the playoff games, they brought, big names like this in. So Waghorn from Toronto refereed in the NHL for years, and he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Early 1900s, people aren't aware of this, Lou Marsh. Does everyone know who Lou Marsh is? Lou Marsh Trophy? Canadian Athlete of the Year, amateur or professional, Lou Marsh Trophy. He was born and raised in Camelford, or at least partially raised in Camelford. I think his family left there when he was about 12 years old, something like that. But he came back into the area, so NHL and Lou Marsh Trophy, he came back into the area, we know, in the 1914 era, and refereed games in the Trenton-Frankfurt area. We haven't absolutely found a paper report of him refereeing a TVL game, although there's books published there in Belleville Sports Hall of Fame that say he did, so we're going with that. Okay, and the other one I mentioned here is Dick Clapper. People say Dick Clapper was referee. Yes, he was. Dick was probably the biggest proponent of the league. Besides playing in it, and his dad coached in it for years, when Dick was playing NHL hockey in Boston, his family stayed in Hastings. His son, Don, and Marilyn, were both born and raised there. And he would spend a lot of time in Hastings. I mean, I guess he was that good that he'd get out of practices. He would typically go to a game, take the train from Hastings into Toronto, play at the Gardens. My dad was a friend of his. My dad had lots of free passes with Dick. Particularly if he had a game in Montreal or Ottawa, the following week, he stayed in Hastings all week long. And so he's an active player in Boston, and he's going out and refereeing in this league. And his dad would get him in, would second him to refereeing because the things were getting pretty rough, or if Marmer was in town and they thought they were going to beat up on the Hastings guys, then they would bring Dick, and of course once Dick was on the ice, people tended to, well, I say they were more interested in getting an autograph than they were in fighting with each other, so. And there's also colorful stories out of Hastings that my dad always told this story. This is oral, though. We haven't found this. That when he first went to the NHL, 1927, that he would be home, and not only did he referee, he played for Hastings. Hastings was typically holding up the cellar. My dad would say that it wasn't uncommon for Dick to play a Friday night game, 2 or 3 shifts, leave, and grab the train to Toronto for a game at the Leafs the next night. So it makes a nice piece of history. We don't know, but we're going to mention it. But we're going to qualify it as oral history, not as fact. Okay, Mike. So I just bring this up, and I don't want it to sound political, but we have 3 guys here from the area, and none of them are in the Peterborough Sports Hall of Fame. Now that doesn't mean that anyone is hard against this, any reason. I've talked to, help me, Bobby, the president of the league there, the lacrosse, or the president of the Hall of Fame. Kenny Rattan. I've talked to Kenny Rattan about it. He says, look, all we need is nomination. So at the end of all this research, we'll be, submitting these 3 guys to posthumously, I guess is the term, be inducted in the Peterborough Sports Hall of Fame. And I've talked to Don about it too. Okay. So Lakefield, so now we're going to jump into some of the Lakefield involvement. And I have to say that Lakefield, although they were involved in the very early years quite heavily, they weren't near as involved throughout the history of the league as Marmer, Madoc, Camelford, Sterling, Hastings, Norwood, that sort of thing. But they were. I mean, they were in regularly, just not as regularly as some of those more southern communities. So in 1900, the very first year, Lakefield ended up in 3rd place. Keene beat them the first game, as we already talked about. But Camelford went on. They were just a powerhouse. I don't think they lost a game. I mean, there was only 6 or 8 games. But I don't think Camelford lost once. And some of that Camelford team, they are old Camelford people, most of them, and I know some of their descendants. I went to high school in Camelford. I was raised just outside Hastings, went to high school there, so I have lots of connections in Camelford, or more now that people have gone away and come back and retired. And so many of the players here, they're the grandfather of guys I went to school with. So in 1912, Lakefield defeated Tass. Now, TAS, people ask, who is TAS? TAS was Total Abstinence Society. It was the era of prohibition, and it was an initiative taken by the Catholic parishes. Peterborough being one of the ringleaders. Peterborough being, St. Peter's being a big Catholic diocese. Actually, I shouldn't say parishes, dioceses. And so Peterborough was one of the ringleaders in it, and so they had a lot of good players come through it. Interesting that Lakefield defeated TAS. Jack Coughlin of Durrow was playing for TAS. You can imagine how good Lakefield would have been had he been playing for Lakefield. But Lakefield ultimately lost the final to Marma that year, but who knows if, one could easily speculate, had somebody of his caliber been playing for Lakefield, the guys that he learned down the way here, his hockey, they'd have probably won it that year. So in 1948, I'm just hitting some of the highlights of what happened over Lakefield history. So this is a colorful history. In 1948, there was a fracas in the penalty box in a game in Campbellford. A guy by the name of Charlie Birch, I think I've got his first name right, but if anyone has any observation on that, please
the spelling is B-I-R-C-H.
Oh, okay, although the paper...
Instead of you.
Well, this is good to know, because the paper spelled it both ways. This year they called it B-U, and I wondered if it was two different surnames, or if we're talking the same family. So you think, Neil, it was...
I know for a fact.
It was the B-I?
I know the family quite well.
Okay. Was Charlie a bit of a roughhouse?
Pardon?
Was Charlie a bit of a roughneck?
Well, he was a very physical man. As I recall, that particular incident, if I may comment on it,
right.
His younger brother, Tom Birch, who's well known by many people here,
right.
was in the penalty box, and he and I think Freeze started a bit of a fracas.
It had been going all season, though.
Chuck Birch, Charlie, was his older brother who
right.
had been in World War II,
right.
and he was not going to let Tom suffer. And he went over, and lo and behold, he tore the penalty box door right off from the...
I've heard that story.
He chipped it and pulled it right off all the hinges and so on.
Right.
And he jumped in to assist his brother Tom.
Right.
As time went on and years went on, Tom Birch became a very, very capable boxer at Palace Pier in Toronto and all these places.
I want to get some of that from
Chuck could have stayed back and not bothered, but anyway.
Okay. So Tom could have handled himself.
Yeah.
I don't think Free was that much of a scrapper, but he was certainly a good hockey player. I mean, he's one of the people with Olympic medal here with the Sudbury Wolves, or at least World Cup. Anyway, the funny part of the story is, so who's on the ice but OPP Sergeant Archie Eady? Now, does anyone know that name?
I do.
Archie Eady was
I played with Archie in Campbellford.
Pardon?
I played hockey with Archie in Campbellford.
Archie was he was the OPP sergeant for years, and a very, very respected, gentle man, and highly respected in Campbellford. Halloween night, he didn't, he kicked us in the butt maybe, but that was about it. Anyway, he's on the ice, and Archie's not a fighter. But on this night, whatever was going on, it's all described in the paper. Archie's involved in this melee, we called it, on the ice. Who did they call in? But, I didn't give his name here, but OPP Constable, his name kind of fails me anyway. Anyway, this guy's working for Archie. Archie's on the ice fighting, and they have to bring the constable in to break it up. And Archie's making notes on how well he handled this. We can only presume that, but it makes for a good story. We say, as I say, there's lots of colorful history in this league. So Jack Doris, I mentioned Jack Doris. I mean, everybody knows Jack Doris simply because he served on council for so long and was such a dedicated, local politician. And I'm meeting with Jack this Saturday to discuss some of this. But so he played for Lakefield in '53. He also played for Havelock. I think the following year maybe. And then 53, Lakefield semifinal versus Frankfurt. This is the year, Neil, and you're familiar with this, that Lakefield had been trouncing everybody that year, including Marmot. Now, when I say trouncing everyone, they only met each other twice. But so they ended the pack in first place. And Frankfurt's in town for the first game of the semifinal. And the edict came down. By this time, the offices are in Batawa. The Bata Shoe Company down at Frankfurt area had really spearheaded the league. You know, Mr. Bata from Bata Shoe Company. And so the edict came down that Lakefield was suspended, and so everybody went home. And then Frankfurt came up against Norwood, and Norwood trounced them. However, Lakefield had been trouncing Norwood all year. And so, I mean, eventually, do I not mention that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, so here it is. Here, Marmot swept Norwood then, and Lakefield was left blowing in the wind. And the guy, it was all over a goalie from by name of Jones. Would you happen to know his first name, Neil? I mean, I can talk to you another time.
I can't recall, but I can see him. He's a dark-haired guy.
Right.
Yeah.
He, I mean, they let it go all season and then put the protest in as the playoffs were about to start. Whatever that was about. Okay, Mick. So here we are getting into some Lakefield players now. Now this is not a TVL team. Don shared these pictures with me. And I think some of you might recognize yourself. Well, no, this is early. This is before anybody here. So this is the 1912. This is a typical Lakefield championship team. However, you've got only so many player resources to draw from. And so these guys often played on more than one team. So the ones in the red here are TVLers. And if you can just make it smaller again, I'll just get their names here. Their names are on the bottom here. So, so let's go middle row, second one in. Harry Blewett. Is he here? No. Is he still around? Anyone? People know that name, I'm sure. There we go. That's good. Oh, now I've lost my reference to the red circles, though.
Well, I'll get you. Okay.
Second and third one in.
Yeah, so then the third one in was, if you can just swing us back up again, Mike, Frank Hill. That's a name from Lakefield, I know, and the Hills and Hastings were the same family. And they were hockey players, too. And then the guy in the back row, it looks like a coach, if I can just get his name, but I would guess it was his son played in the league. Where are we? How many in was he? Two?
Joe Moran.
Yeah, what was his name?
Yeah.
Can we just go back up again?
He is, he's the father of a
Joe
famous soldier
Moran.
in Lakefield.
Pardon me? Wes?
Joe Moran is the father of a famous soldier in Lakefield, Eddie Moran.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, anyhow.
Okay. So to your knowledge, he coached in the league? He looks like he's a coach on this team. You know, he's not in uniform anyway. At least I don't think that's a hockey jersey there.
He might well have been a player. I think he was. I think he's in another picture there as a player.
You know what, good point. Often in this era, like soccer today, the goalie wore a different colored jersey. So maybe he was a player. Okay. Okay, I think I'm finished with that. And so the point I want to make here was these guys played on maybe 2 or 3 teams in any given season. So this is a more recent team, circa 1950 Lakefield team. And again, I've got a legend here. So the ones in circle played on the 1948 team, the team we just, or the era we just spoke of. And then the blue ones are the 1953 team where the suspension occurred. And so I guess we'll go through the same exercise and see if we can get their names here.
All right, here we go.
Okay, sorry, I didn't make a mental note.
Back row.
So the back row, I intended to underline their names, I should have.
The first one and the last one.
Oh, first one, okay, so Ross Kellebree. Do I need a Kellebree here? No? Okay. So the blue,
We're the blue.
okay, so the first one, this would be Calvary then.
Yeah, Ross Calvert.
Okay, then the next one to him, oh no, two, one over from, skip one, then the third one was,
Jack Chitty.
Jack Chitty.
Yep.
Yes, yep.
Then, no.
And then, yeah, Herb Knox. So some of you, I think, recognize him just from their picture here. And then this is Birch here. I think it
don't
is.
think so.
Jack Birch?
Oh, the coach there is Jack Birch.
Yes.
Oh, the coach.
Yeah.
Oh, I
He's
got
a
it.
brother of Charlie and Tom.
Oh, I've got it wrong then. Okay, yeah, I was just taking
That's
players.
Sabatino.
B-I-R-C-H.
Right, okay, okay. So then, so I've got all these wrong. So this guy is really the second guy in, which is Percy Calvary. Does that sound? No, middle row.
Sabatino.
Sabatino, right. And then next to him is, there are two, skip one, then one over in the middle. Oh, Bill Twist. Sure. Yeah, surely lives right across the road from me. Actually, I intend to call her, see if she wanted to come up tonight. And then this is
Gary Wilford.
Wilford.
Gary's here.
Is that our Wilford family?
Yeah, Derry's here, I think, isn't he? I spoke to him on the way in. Yeah, Derry, do you recognize yourself here?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How many goals did you get that year?
One, I think.
Okay.
Wow.
I think this pretty well wraps me up here. I could have got a lot more on the history, but I was asked to focus on Lakefield, and because Lakefield was, you see, Lakefield was in the early 1900s a lot, and then through the, well, we're breaking the book into 3 years. So the league went 1900 to 1916, it broke for obvious reasons, the Second World War, or the First World War, what am I saying? And then it started up again in about 1922 or 3, and it ran right to 1940, and we're calling that the Gala era. Now we were calling it years, however the publisher, when we got to the final era, the 1940s and 50s, which everybody here remembers, we were calling it the golden years. And the publisher said, no, that sounds like a bunch of retirees. so we changed it to era. So that's what we're doing. So the point I want to make is Lakefield was very involved in the early era, 1900, 1916. And then our research would indicate that they weren't involved whatsoever from the early 20s back to 1940. But going through the papers, we see them very involved in comparable level of hockey right here in Peterborough, intermediate Peterborough League hockey. And so Lakefield and Keene were more typically involved in that during that era. And then by the third grade era, the golden era as we call it, Lakefield was back in again. That was the Batty years that the Batty Cup was was the league trophy. Other than that, I mean, there are something like, I'm going to say we're probably up to 8 or 9 trophies over the course of the league. The Bata Trophy was the longest lasting. It was donated as the league trophy. The other trophies were typically, if you won it 3 times, not necessarily 3 times in a row, but if you won it collectively 3 times, you got to keep it. So then you had to start over and hope for another donor. Now the donors were all, almost across the board, they were politicians, either members of parliament or members of provincial or MLAs, Marma, Chelmsford, Peterborough. So the first cup was the Stratton Cup. There are many Stratton Cups around. There was lacrosse, there was this Peterborough Intermediate League with Stratton Cup. Beautiful trophy. We thought we had it out of the Peterborough Archives, Museum and Archives. However, it ended up, it was the Peterborough Intermediate Trophy. But we did find it on a shot from Fenland Falls. One of the historic players in Fenton Falls, 1902, 1903, and 1905, the goalie was a guy by the name of Alvin Gould. And Gould, his father was a doctor in Fenton Falls and a pharmacist. In those days, they were able to combine their services. And so he had a drugstore, a pharmacy, on the main street of Fenton Falls, which is still in operation today. Not under the Gould name, but it's still the same store, same location. So the cup was always presented in the front window of that. That's the last history we have of it. However, the current pharmacist there, an owner of that pharmacy, gave me the name of a descendant of that family who has a summer home in Fenton Falls, and a bit of an amateur historian. And he says, I think she's going to be able to help you. He said he thinks she's got archives. She's in Florida right now, so I haven't been able to get hold of her, but we're optimistic that maybe we'll come up with a nice picture of that. Other than that, we have pictures of most of the trophies, and we're introducing our sections with the trophies that apply to that era. Some of them aren't very good. They're cut or extracted from team photos, that sort of thing. But at least it's going to give the reader an idea of what the players were competing for. So I think that's about all I have, Don, unless there's any questions, or do we want to get any, is there any? I know Neil has, yeah.
Yeah, but, well, first of all, you've done a wonderful job, and you've made a great job. I think they can all hear me. Okay. The ones that can't, it's just a bonus data.
Okay.
I really admire what you have done, and you've preserved some history of Lakefield and so on. Going back to the initial, that's James Ridpath, printer, who was the founder of Lakefield.
Right.
His brother Bruce
Right.
is the only Lakefield resident who grew up here who ever played in the NHL. And he won the Stanley Cup in 1912 and 13 with the Ottawa Senators. And he was...
that picture over there, I think?
There's
Right.
Bruce in all his glory there.
Right.
Well, he's a brother of the founder. You have it named as a printer, and he was a printer. He ran the paper here in Lakefield.
Right.
Those of you who know Charlie, that's Charlie's father. This hockey player over here is Charlie's uncle, Bruce Ridpath.
That's a lovely picture.
Bruce was a hero.
Right.
And in Toronto, he had a claim. He was recognized and accepted by the city as a real, almost immortal hero.
Mm-hmm.
He was crossing the street one night and got hit by a driver and was injured and never could play again. And he died in his late 30s.
Right.
And it was a huge funeral in Lakefield. But he was known in Toronto like Wayne Gretzky was known. And a fellow by the name, I think you may have heard of him, our ex-premier, Prime Minister, wrote a book.
Oh,
Okay.
Brian, or,
Yeah.
Harper.
That's the guy. Yeah, right. Stephen Harper wrote a book, and he explains and extols Bruce Ridpath. And if anybody for Lakefield history, you should have that book, because there's no more acclaim. And he went on to how well accepted Ridpath was. Anyhow, that's him. Now, I can't believe he too didn't play as a kid, because he was a similar age to Jack Conklin.
Well,
And I'm sure he and Conklin
Right.
probably played together as kids.
I
And helped
will-
develop each other's ability.
I will double check that. He may well have. It's just maybe a name I didn't, follow
The
up on.
comments I'm going to make
Right.
just quickly, and I'm not the speaker, we had a very... But the comments I'd like to make is that are from the eyes of a 12 to 15-year-old kid. So lots of times what we thought were marvelous feats become routine or secondary. But in my day, the best hockey players in the Trent Valley Hockey League were Joe Blewett, a Lakefield boy who had played OHA hockey and starred in Peterborough leagues and so on. There was Joe Blewett. And then there was Gus Leonard, who played for Marmara. But Gus always had a very good supporting cast.
Right.
Now, that's not to take anything away from Gus. He's a fine hockey player and a wonderful gentleman, a World War II vet. But he had more teamwork with him. Narmer had good hockey players. But one of the most astounding was a guy from Havelock by the name of Ralph Rastus Hamilton. And Rastus Hamilton dazzled everybody.
Right.
And he was God bless him, but he was a frail guy, and he had quite protruding teeth, more so than mine.
Right.
And he grabbed that puck, and he'd just go through the whole team. And he'd grab that puck and go through the whole team. And everybody raved about Rastus. Those were the really three fine hockey players. The Trent Valley League was also a grooming place for a few young kids, like Jimmy Morrow from Hastings, who was a fine hockey player, and if he hadn't had some bad habits that he maybe picked up from the Watson family,
Breaking referees' legs.
excelled much beyond that. And another kid that played in the TVL for Hastings was Jackie Kane. Kane was a Peterborough boy. He went down and played. He never played junior hockey in Peterborough. He went down and played TVL in Hastings, then went and played for the Barrie Flyers and had a very successful hockey career
I gotta get together with
in
you.
minor pro hockey in Clinton, New York. I had the misfortune or the fortune to play in the TVL when I was in 1951 or 2. Lakefield had a team, and we entered the league and they couldn't get any players. So that Donnie Henry and I, we got recruited, and it was quite a learning experience for us. Anyhow, they played about 3 or 4 games, and then, not because of our contribution, but probably because of our lack of contribution, the team folded. And that was that for that. But I did play in the TVL, and that was that for that. The other thing I remember is that post-war, from about 1947 on, the crowds at the games were fantastic and the fans were rabid. And before the new rink, what we called the new rink, was built in 1948, before that, the old rink, get a load of this. It didn't have a penalty box. If you got a penalty, they sent you over to serve on the east side of the rink, the old rink. And of course, the visiting teams, if they had a rambunctious lad, Lakefield always knew enough to post a couple of their toughest guys in town, each side of that penalty box. Now, he wasn't near as tough for further in the game because he didn't want to go back to that area. They'd have one posted here, one there, and it was very uncomfortable for any team that got a penalty. And if you can imagine the players' box, it was a joint players' box. It was over on the west side of the building. There was no dividing thing between the visiting team and the other team. And also there was a well back behind a pump where they got the water to flood the ice. But both teams mingled. And I'm sure my nose was too important to me to ever get involved in any fighting in those days, but I'm sure that a lot of hockey players resumed what started out in the ice in the penalty box. Remember, and John played in the same age, John and Stu here, same age as me. He played in the same era. Bobby Allen is similar age to me, and same age, I believe. And Bob knew Jack Kane, and speaking of, and those fellows. And John knew them as well.
And can I just interrupt? Did you say Kane went on to the NHL?
K-A-N-E.
Went on to the NHL? No.
He played for Barrie Flyers in the
Barrie
junior
Flyers.
A after that.
Oh,
And then
okay.
he went and played in the East Coast League for Clinton Comets.
Oh, okay.
Still lives down in Clinton, New York.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
The 2 others, just to get some stories here, the 2 other, and you're going to remember them, were the Puffers from Norway. 2 brothers. I don't have their first names. They were rough tough. Their father was the policeman in Norway. And then, does anyone remember them, their first names? But anyway, the one Puffer, and he had a nickname too, he was a rough tough guy. Anyway, there was an article in one of the papers. After he wrapped up the TBL, he enlisted in the Army in 1946, and they interviewed him about giving up the TBL, and he said something about, well, at least I don't have to face all that riffraff and Havelock anymore. And so he's posted to Coburg with, I guess the Hastings Prince Edward Regiment maybe. And of course, those guys played OHA hockey. Some of it was senior B or OHA, intermediate A for sure. It was good level hockey, Gus Leonard for sure. And anyway, so he goes out to his first hockey game, and who does he meet? But three of his old Havelock buddies. He's in the first game, you know. So, yeah, so lots of stories. That's the kind of thing that we're telling for sure. But I just wanted to share one story, not too hockey related, but it was the talking about sports in general, Lakefield, Hastings, that sort of thing. And I told you before the meeting. I delivered papers in Hastings when I was about 12 years old, and my mother's family were all American, or most of them anyway. So my cousins were typically over from the States, Rochester area. And so my 12-year-old cousin is helping me with my, and I've read this story a number of times, is helping me with my papers. And there's a benefit game going in Hastings with Ray Judd pitching and Don Wasson catching. There's a benefit game over Porter Fife. If any of you remember him, he had
Wayne Dodd?
well, no, Porter Fife. It broke his skull, you know. And anyway, so in the course of delivering papers, my cousin and I argued. We were talking about this ball game, and he said something about, it's Canadians, it won't be a very good ball or something like that. And so we get in a bit of an argument or a discussion about who produced better ball players, Canadians or Americans. And so I said, well, just hold off. I knew Ray Judd was preaching. But I wasn't saying anything. And I said, hold off your comment until you see this game. And at the end of the game, he says, maybe Canadians are good ball players. And so I lived that lie. I talk on Skype to him. He's in Houston. I lived in Houston for a while too, or did a lot of business there. And I just confided with him about 2 years ago the lie I lived. So that Ray Judd was in fact an American. With that, that's about all I have, folks. But there's certainly some contacts here. Neil, I want to get together with you. I'll get your contact, or maybe here, or I'll talk to Red and get it. And Bob, I wouldn't mind getting a few of your stories. We are doing a section on stories. So we want to get some of these stories if we can, and give credit to where they came from. That sort of thing. We just call it remembrances or something like that. So, okay then.
Did the league finish?
I'm back.
Okay.
When do you anticipate the book being done?
We're aiming for September, certainly by the end of September, and hopefully middle. The publisher says, look, you got to get it out before Christmas, because somebody doesn't know what their either husband or husband. But we don't. To be quite frank, folks, we don't really care. We want to get this history documented. We just started with doing a paper and submitted to the Sports Hall of Fame, Belleville and Peterborough. And then we said, we think we've got enough here to do a kind of colorful book. If we can recover some of our publishing costs, that's all.
Well, I got a What a great evening. Thank you, Mr. Wasson, for adding to it. Dave, we have a token gift for you here, for you coming out and making a very good evening. I thank you very much, and I'm sure we do too.
We'll be looking forward to the completion of that book.
Okay, I've certainly enjoyed all of you, and I see there's some good stories here, so you're going to hear from me.
What year did the league finish?
1955.
55.
And yes, and it's a bit of a challenge for us. Our original scope was to do what we call the independent TVL, and maybe I didn't emphasize that. So the TVL was independent of OHA. They had their own rule book, their own charter, that sort of thing. We haven't looked up the charter. We suspect it's in Coburg with the archives there. But it was a totally independent league, although they followed OHA. And we spell that out in the book, that their intent wasn't to usurp OHA whatsoever. However, by the end of it, by the 1950s, and you can well appreciate this, what happened in 1952, the Trenton Flyers came into it. The president of the league by that time was a guy by the name of Art Duncan. He was the human resources manager for the Bata Shoe Company. He was a Belleville hockeyist, and his nephews were senior players in Belleville at the time, good players, featured all the time in the Belleville paper. Anyway, so he leaned towards the south for expansion. And so he brought in the Trenton Flyers in '52, and I remember the controversy. Hastings had a pretty good team. Morrow was about 17 or 18 at that time. And I mean, they thought they were going to give Marmora a challenge, but they had to get by the RCF Flyers first. And the story is, I mean, they had a broad width of talent. I mean, they could bring people in temporarily from across Canada. They just won a gold medal 4 years before that. So the controversy was that they stacked their team with players. I mean, they were legit. They were residents of the air base. And, but that started, and we call this the start of the arms race. We give each chapter a title. So we call that year the start of the arms race. So Art Duncan, to keep teams like Hastings Norwood have what Frankfurt in it, he had to allow ringers. We call them superchargers in the book, I think, something like that. So it was all these Peterborough, OHA, certainly intermediate, B, A, some senior B, that sort of thing, players, Moon Wooten, that sort of thing, Jack Doris. And Belleville did the same thing. Frankfurt did the same thing from drawing people from you know, the Belleville area. I just thought of something. I missed an NHLer here that played in the league. Do you guys remember Vern Goyer?
Vern Goyer?
Yeah, Goyer. Yeah, from Belleville. He played in the league. I forgot, so we're actually 7. I knew we were missing one all the time I wrote this up. He played in the league 2 years. He ended up with Point Anne, and that was the last year. So to answer that question, long story short, the league came to a crunching end at 1955. Dick Clapper and his brother-in-law, Joe Jones in Hastings, tried to promote it, but it was to no avail. So Hastings Halifax Norwood went to East Peterborough League. Frankfurt dropped out. However, what happened, Campbellford, Marmora, Madoc joined an OHA intermediate C circuit with Bancroft and a few of those in the north and Napanee in the south. And so that went for about 10 years purely as OHA. However, by 1962, they were calling themselves Trent Valley Hockey League. So, and now, I mean, we've had notices in papers trying to tease out information from people, and the response we're getting are from the people, because many of those people are still around, that played through the 60s, 70s. So they weren't really TVL, they weren't independent TVL, but they called themselves TVL, which now more or less just referred to a geographic area of an OHA circuit. However, they're adamant that we include them, so it's going to be more work, so that's going to put a crunch for our September timeline to get all that researched. Although it's much more recent and there's many more people around, so maybe it'll go easier. So does that answer the question? 1955, but then it became an OHA circuit for another 10 or 15 years.
Okay, I need to finish off this meeting.